What is the Chinese Communist Party, and why is it important for understanding the China of today and quite possibly fighting China in the future? In 2010, journalist Richard McGregor wrote in his book, The Party, Why the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has endured into the 21st century. And he said, the Chinese Communist Party's enduring grip on power is based on a simple formula. The party has made sure it keeps a lock hold on the state and the three pillars of survival strategy: control the personnel, propaganda, and the People's Liberation Army. This is another installment in my China series, which I hope can be of use to those of you who will be involved in the next big conflict with China. America will likely be at war with China in 2027 or 2028. This video series, along with my previous series and slideshow on the People's Liberation Army, is available at ryanmcbeth.substack.com for paid members with no ads. If you have a .mil email address and want a copy of this to show your soldiers without ads, send me an email. I'll get you an offline copy. I only ask for credit. And if you need this for a class, I have an accompanying PowerPoint at ryanmcbeth.substack.com. And again, I'll send it to you for free if you send me an email from a .mil address. If you're watching this video, odds are you will be involved in a conflict with the Communist Party of China. You're going to face drones, you're going to face hypersonic missiles, you're going to face a near-peer threat. Why should you also have to worry about hairy balls? The Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra sets the standard in precision. This device features two specifically developed skin-safe cutting attachments for different functions: a classic blade for trimming and a shaving head for a close shave. The trimmer blade, with its advanced, longer, wider, rounded teeth, cuts even thick hair effortlessly. It's tough on hair, but gentle on skin. Thoroughly remove your body hair in just a few strokes, preventing skin irritation. And if you ever thought, Ryan, that's great, but I want to stick something in my ear hole, Manscaped has you covered with the Weed Whacker too. And I actually think this is way more important in my opinion, because if you ever talk with somebody and the hair is just kind of growing wild out of their ears and they're trying to talk to you and you're like, look, this is your opportunity not to be that guy. But both the Lawnmower 5.0 and the Weed Whacker 2.0 are waterproof, so you can use them in the shower. The Lawnmower 5.0 also has this LED lamp with two color temperatures for different skin tones. Right now, you'll get two free extras: a pair of boxer briefs with a special pocket for the boys, and a toiletry bag to carry your Manscaped products in style. Get 20% off plus free shipping and two gifts when you use code Macbeth at manscaped.com. And may your balls be as smooth as joint all-domain operations against the Chinese Communist Party. Now, it is hard to understand modern China, the PLA, and China's rise without some knowledge of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. When we talk about Communist China, that is the People's Republic of China, we must understand that it's a country with a complex history, a history I could never properly cover in just one single video. And to make things easier and more digestible, I'm going to focus on the important moments. I recommend anybody watching this not to stop here. Consider reading up and watching all you can on China, the Communist Party that controls the country, and the people who call this place home. To understand why China fell to communism, you have to understand what, or rather who, made it so appealing. Kind of like a Marvel Avengers movie. You know, this stuff has complicated origin stories, weird timelines, and some quirky folks in charge. So there's this German guy. He sponges off his wealthy wife and close friends, and he lives in exile in England. He's even got a very German name: Karl Marx. Around the mid-1800s or so, this Marx guy and his friend, another German named Friedrich Engels, wrote something called the Communist Manifesto. Ironically, Marx and Engels wrote this manifesto for folks who were revolting in the post-Napoleon economic and political systems around 1848 in Europe. The revolutions of 1848 didn't do much to the chagrin of Marx and Engels. Nevertheless, Marx and his buddy kept writing on and on about the ills and exploitations of capitalism. Both Marx and Engels died in relative obscurity. Their ideas kind of gathered dust and cobwebs for the most part until the early 1900s. Then along come some Eastern Europeans, like a Russian in exile, and his name was Vladimir Lenin. There are some other notables too who say that Marx and Engels got the timeline for communism all wrong. And these enterprising Eastern European Marxists suggested that Marxist thought could be adopted by countries well outside of Marx's original suggestion for communism to take hold. We're talking the US, Germany, United Kingdom, which was his original thought for communism. These newer Marxists suggested that less developed countries like the Russian Empire and its surrounding territories could be controlled by a vanguard party that would be effectively guiding these nations toward ideal communist states, sort of a left-wing college student's dream or a communist worker's utopia. While the whole Marxist-Leninist idea is familiar to those of us who know about the Cold War, at the time it was revolutionary. Yeah, I guess it was, wasn't it? It was a revolutionary idea. These Marxist-Leninists did something that Marx and Engels failed to do. They made Marxist thought relevant to places outside of the developed world, including places like Russia and China. Organizations like the Comintern or Communist International advocated for world communism. And these Marxist-Leninists from places like the newly minted Soviet Union focused on spreading their ideology. And they also supported nationalist movements to disrupt what they saw as industrial capitalism's foundation: colonialism and imperialism. Now, Chinese civilization is one of the world's oldest civilizations on Earth. China has been home to some of the most modern-day amenities long before they hit the West. Toilet paper, paper money, modern government bureaucracies, civil service, sewer systems, running water, and more. When the Roman Empire, which is the height of like classical Western civilization, is compared to, say, Han China, I mean, the differences are startling. China had for centuries a higher standard of living, wealth, learning, and comfort that were even remotely possible in the West. Before the early modern and modern periods, China was a force to be reckoned with. However, centuries of isolationism, corruption within, and foreign attacks and interventions from the British, Russians, United States, it caused China to collapse into ineptitude. Something needed to happen, and the Chinese people were looking for solutions to China's problems. At the beginning of the 1900s, China was a country in crisis. The reasons for this are like a mile long, but they include humiliation at the hands of foreigners, like from the Opium Wars and the post-Boxer Rebellion interventions, and a diminished status of China among other seemingly lesser nations, and a crumbling system of government, among other things. China was rocked by a series of revolutions during much of the 20th century, and these revolutions had a tremendous effect on China and its various peoples. Modern China, a country known today as the People's Republic of China, is a massive country with a diverse population that has nearly 60-some ethnic groups that are mostly dominated by the Han. They played a tremendous role in the development of China as a modern nation that we know today. Now, China's revolutionary era began with the Republican Revolution of 1911. The 1911 revolution in China promised to usher in a new era for the Chinese, one which they could reassert China as a powerful player on the world stage. However, the Republican dream died a slow, agonizing death, and much of this was due to internal divisions, external pressures, and also the Japanese and the Second World War. Now, despite its failures, the Republican Revolution was a monumentous event that represented a triple revolution against a 250-year-old dynasty, the Qing, a 1,000-year-old social system, the Junxia, and a monarchy dating back like 4,000 years. The Republican revolutionaries had hoped to wipe the slate clean and begin anew. With the Qing dynasty gone, the Republican revolutionaries were faced with unrelenting chaos. This newfound republic faced numerous internal divisions, such as communists, warring ethnic groups, warlords, private militaries, and all of them refused to recognize the new government's authority. To make matters worse, foreigners also presented serious political and economic pressures. The revolution was further undermined by a lack of a unified vision for China's future. History points out that it was far easier to bring the end of Qing rule and its institutions than it was to actually build new institutions and a new republican ideal. This lack of a unified vision for their republic can be located in the whole Chinese notion of what exactly a republic was. There existed this uneasy relationship between Western knowledge, concepts, and systems and indigenous Chinese resources. And this uneasy relationship, this mashing together of Western and Chinese thinking, particularly political thought, it's that created this foundational problem for the Chinese Republic. Much of Chinese history and culture lacked experience with republics, republican ideals, and even the vernacular required to understand the concept of a republic. Now, this contrasts with the United States, which had a long history of self-rule and republican government due to the fact that jolly old England pretty much ignored us unless we had to pay taxes. The lack of communication between rural and urban areas in China also compounded issues facing this newfound republic. This meant the republic, which was formed after the revolution, had very few avenues to connect with the Chinese people who lived largely rural agrarian lives. The demise of the internal Chinese Republican experiment ended with Sun Yat-sen handing power over to the Chinese general that helped defeat the Qing government, Yuan Shikai. Now, Sun Yat-sen kind of hoped that this general would take on the Republic's mission faithfully, only to be disappointed when Yuan Shikai started acting like a warlord. And by the way, Yuan Shikai would be deposed in 1916 by another warlord. Now, Sun Yat-sen might sound familiar to you. He played a foundational role in early Republican China. And he also played a foundational role in establishing the National People's Party, or the KMT, Kuomintang. And he reorganized the party's structure around 1923, although sometimes you hear them referred to as nationalists instead of Kuomintang. Now, this is probably what I would call the beginnings of the nationalist revolution in China, where certain Chinese politicians are seeking to unify China, wipe out the warlords who've taken control of much of the country, and rebuild China into something better. Ironically, this nationalist party was built with a Leninist model in mind. They received, at least initially, a tremendous amount of support from the Soviet Union. That's right, the Soviets supported the nationalists, at least to start. Now, around the time of the KMT party's founding, the Chinese Communist Party comes into the picture. However, we really don't know what happened at the first People's Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, but it's from this moment of obscurity that China's ruling elite emerged and converged with the nationalists in the hope of securing national unity. The formation of the Chinese Communist Party is quite telling. At least 6 of the 12 who took part in the first Congress were to leave the party. Even Mao Zedong played a rather minor role in forming the party. These Leninist parties, communist and nationalist, were not political parties in the Western sense. These political parties were not really primarily devoted to waging elections based on a loose set of interests and ideologies. Instead, both parties were this tightly structured, centralized, and ideologically committed organization. They restricted memberships, and they strove to mobilize mass support. Now, of these two parties, the KMT, or the Kuomintang, also known as the Nationalists, we got 3 names here. They built an army and also schools as a precursor to reunifying the country. The very nature of these parties came from the political climate they operated inside. These two political parties were organized along lines that allowed them to contest these local warlords who controlled vast swaths of Chinese real estate. Without this organization, it's hard to imagine the KMT or the CCP being very successful against the warlords. They had to be this kind of organization. Out of the 2 parties that formed after the failure of the Republic, the Nationalist Party would emerge as the strongest contender and would ultimately garner the most international support, at least in the beginning of the so-called nationalist revolution of the 1920s. With help from the Soviet Union, yeah, that's right, the nationalists would go on to challenge the warlords who had taken hold of China following the revolution of 1911. Under the nationalists, between 1926 and 1928, the Kuomintang brought the Warlord Era to an end and to a greater extent unified China through what is known as the Northern Expedition. The Northern Expedition was a united effort taken on by the Nationalists and also the fledgling Communists. However, it is important to note that the Nationalists played the largest role in the Northern Expedition, bringing an end to warlord strangleholds over China proper. The Communist Party would stay in the shadows for most of the 1920s, slowly gaining support of urban populations and also some people within the KMT party themselves. However, under General Chiang Kai-shek, a bloody and violent coup started in 1927 would oust the Communists from the Kuomintang. Now, this began a dark era for the Chinese Communists, who would have to retreat into the western parts of China, running from the armies of Chiang Kai-shek and his allies. This movement in Chinese Communist history would lead to a very pivotal event, the Long March. The Long March had the Communists fleeing from nationalist armies and air forces between 1934 and 1935 into the rugged western interior of China. Many communists died during this retreat, and much of this comes to us in the West in Edward Snow's book Red Star over China from 1935. It is during this moment that Mao ascends to power, and the communists begin rethinking their strategy for conquering China. Historians label the period following the purge of the communists as the Nanjing Era, which lasted from 1928 until 1937. The Nanjing Era came from this tumbling down when the Japanese war machine invaded China, forcing the nationalists to retreat deeper into the country's interior. Before the Japanese invasion of China, the Nanjing Era seemed promising, despite its bloody start after the Northern Expedition. The Nanjing Era saw the submission of many warlords to the nationalist government. However, these local strongmen still maintained their own local power centers, making it very difficult for the nationalists to develop a strong centralized government, something that had been the aim of the nationalists since their formation in 1923. The biggest problem with the Nanjing Era is that the nationalists were their own worst enemy. Corruption, incompetence, and authoritarianism marked the regime from the beginning. The KMT was collectively corrupt to the point where it was not only expensive but a drag on efficiency. And this came directly from Chiang Kai-shek. He complained about this himself. This incompetence led Chiang Kai-shek to rely on military men for positions they were not suited to take over. Chiang Kai-shek's government was relatively weak despite being stronger than the republic that was created after 1911. Chiang's government also relied on authoritarian measures to quell discontent in the countryside and the cities. Nevertheless, Chiang's government was able to secure some victories against unequal treaties, and it was able to build a somewhat competent government. The ultimate undoing of the nationalists, though, was Japan's war on China. What is often left out of history are the Chinese nationalists fighting the Japanese war machine. And yeah, while the Japanese lost, the nationalists were able to hold the line. By the time the Second World War ends, the nationalists are exhausted and broken. The communists who retreated into the interior began to build up steam, and they gained some Soviet support along the way. This period in which the communists hid in China's western interior sort of served as a crucible for the communists kind of licking their wounds. The Maoists, as they referred to themselves later on, would come to a head against the Comintern communists, and this world organization of communists still offered support for the KMT during the 1920s and the early years of exile. With the Chinese communists hiding effectively in Western China, the proletariat masses were out of reach. So the Chinese communists needed to switch strategies. Instead of targeting urban dwellers, because there were none, they targeted poor peasants to support their revolutionary efforts. The shift from urban to rural by the Chinese Communist Party took place over the years. And this made sense given the split between the Comintern communists who targeted the urban proletariat and the Maoists who targeted farmers. Once Japan's war machine was out of the picture in 1945, the Chinese Civil War took off again. This time, the communists were prepared with weapons and other supplies given to them by the Soviet Union or taken from surrendered Japanese stockpiles. The Japanese war against China had decimated the nationalists. This led to the downfall of the nationalist government and the proclamation of the People's Republic of China in 1949. But the story of the communists doesn't end there. The communists under Mao and other fanatical communists would implement radical social programs, including land reform, collectivization, and forced industrialization. This great leap forward would see millions die of starvation, as Mao hoped to turn farm workers into metal workers. This madness would end, sort of, with the end of the Cultural Revolution, which saw mass unrest and revolutionary zeal, which led to countless deaths and political violence. And in 1976, Mao's death and the arrest of the Gang of Four, or those who held prominent positions during the Cultural Revolution, brought about a new revolution in Chinese politics. Deng Xiaoping opened China, and he put an end to the revolutionary chaos. And that guy, he was an enigma to say the least. He offered stability and prosperity, but he did so at the end of a barrel of a gun. Those who refused to get in line were dealt with really harshly. Think of Tiananmen Square, 1989. The China of the 1990s and 2000s was one of increasingly authoritarian moves by the Communist Party, seeking to maintain its monopoly on power. While China has become one of the largest economies in the world, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty, it has also become politically and ideologically re-energized, with politicians like Xi Jinping who say that Taiwan must be brought back into the fold. The people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait are one family. No one can ever sever our family bonds. No one can stop the historical trend of national reunification. And Taiwan is kind of where we leave off. The current president of China, Xi Jinping, has told the People's Liberation Army to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. When a communist dictator tells you what they want to do, believe them. Once again, this video is available on my Substack at ryanbeth.substack.com for paid members with no ads attached. If you have a .mil email address and you want to copy this video to show your soldiers without ads, send me an email. I'll get you an offline copy. I only ask for credit. If you want to support the channel, grab my Intel Life hoodie from Bunker Branding. Control-C, Control-V, because that's pretty much what we do. Thank you guys for watching.
Wow, this girl from Watertown sure is cool. Hey kid, what's going on?
Think tank!
You know, a girl from Watertown is kind of like riding a moped. It's lots of fun till your friends see you on one. What's really cool is a t-shirt or hoodie from Bunker Branding.
Wow! Intel Life! Control-C, Control-V! That's exactly what we do!
And Bunker Branding has all sorts of cool gear.
Intel Life, Aerosol, Live, Laugh, Launch for Destroyer, Trident, HIMARS, and Patriot. Think outside the bomb. Drone Suite Drone, Department of the Boat People, Landmine, and even the tow missile. It would behoove you to grab one today.
Girls from Watertown aren't cool, so wear your Bunker Branding gear.
Now I know.
And knowing's half the battle. Hey babe, you want to dance?
Bunker Branding.